For years, two names remained locked inside police files. Whispered only in family homes and late-night detective offices, names that refused to disappear even when hope slowly faded. Two young lives were taken, two futures erased, and two families were left standing in the long shadow of unanswered questions. Imagine waking up every morning not knowing who killed your son, your daughter, your brother, your friend. Imagine living through birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays with an empty chair at the table and no explanation for why it happened. This is the cruel reality of cold cases, crimes that time tried to bury but never truly could. Tonight's story begins with silence, a silence that lasted not for days or months, but for years, even decades. Silence in police records, silence in neighborhoods where rumors replaced facts, silence in the hearts of families who waited for a knock on the door that never came. But silence has a weakness. It cannot hide the truth forever. And sometimes when the world least expects it, the past returns with answers that change everything. Cold cases are not just unsolved crimes. They are unfinished lives. They are photographs frozen in time, bedrooms left untouched, voices recorded only in memory. They are parents who grow old waiting for justice, siblings who build families of their own while carrying grief that never fades. And investigators who refuse to close a file because something deep inside tells them the story is not over yet. In many of these cases, the evidence is thin, the witnesses are gone, and the trail has gone cold so completely that even the most experienced detectives are forced to admit defeat. But then years later, a single detail changes. A new technology emerges, a forgotten sample is tested. A witness finally finds the courage to speak. Or a guilty conscience begins to crack under the weight of time. And suddenly what once seemed impossible becomes real. The truth begins to surface. Tonight, we are telling the stories of two such cases, the heartbreaking murder of Kirk Ryan Kimberly and the mysterious disappearance and killing of Ree Rasmussen. Two victims separated by geography and circumstance, yet connected by the same haunting pattern, long years of silence followed by shocking breakthroughs that no one saw coming. In Kirk's case, investigators struggled for years with a crime that left almost no clear suspect behind. A case that quietly haunted the department until one overlooked detail reopened the entire investigation. In Ria's case, a young woman vanished, leaving behind fear, rumors, and a trail that seemed to disappear into nothing, while the person responsible continued living an ordinary life in plain sight. These are not just stories about catching criminals. They are stories about patience, persistence, and the unbearable cost of waiting for the truth. As we begin this journey, remember that every cold case carries two timelines. The moment the crime happened, and the moment the truth finally came out. Between those two moments lies a space filled with grief, doubt, and unanswered prayers. What you are about to hear is not only how these crimes were committed, but how time, science, and human determination slowly pulled secrets out of the darkness. Stay with me because the answers that finally solved these cases were hidden for years, and when they came to light, they shocked everyone involved. The morning that changed everything began like so many others, quiet and ordinary, the kind of morning that never warns you it will become the day your life splits in two. Kirk Ryan Kimberly had plans, responsibilities, people who expected him to come home, and the future that, at that moment, still belonged to him. No one knew that before the sun set, his name would become another file number. Another photograph pinned to a police board, another family tragedy that time would struggle to explain. When the call finally came, it did not make sense at first. Words like found, unresponsive, and possible foul play floated through the air, sounding unreal, like lines from someone else's nightmare. By the time the family reached the scene, flashing lights had already erased the calm of the place where Kirk had last been alive, and strangers in uniforms were now the last people who had seen him. In those first hours, grief mixed with confusion, and confusion quickly turned into fear, because no one could say who had done this or why. Investigators worked the scene carefully, but from the very beginning, something felt wrong. There were no clear signs of forced entry, no obvious weapon, no witnesses stepping forward with answers. Kirk had not been known to have enemies. His routine was simple, his circle small, his life unremarkable in the way that most innocent lives are. And yet here he was, gone without explanation. The first days after a murder are supposed to be the most important. This is when evidence is fresh, memories are sharp, and suspects still make mistakes. But in Kirk's case, those crucial first days passed with nothing solid to hold on to. Tips came in, but they contradicted each other. One neighbor thought they heard something late at night. Another insisted they saw a strange car, but no description matched, and none of it could be confirmed. Detectives interviewed friends, co-workers, acquaintances, even people who barely knew him, but every path led to the same dead end. No motive, no suspect, no clear timeline, only questions. As weeks turned into months, the case began to slow. Evidence that once seemed promising turned out to be useless. DNA samples did not match anyone in the system. Fingerprints belonged to Kirk himself or to people who had legitimate reasons to be there. The case file grew thicker, but the answers did not. For the family, time became a cruel enemy. At first, they believed every phone call from the police meant progress. Every knock on the door made their hearts race. But slowly, the calls became less frequent. The updates grew shorter. And eventually, there were no updates at all. The case was not closed, but it was no longer active in the way it once had been. It had become what detectives quietly call cold, a word that sounds harmless but really means forgotten by everyone except the people who suffer the most. Years passed. Birthdays came and went. Holidays were endured rather than celebrated. Kirk's room remained the same, his belongings untouched, as if he might still return. His family replayed his last days over and over in their minds, searching for clues they might have missed, signs they failed to notice, conversations that suddenly felt important. They asked themselves questions no one could answer. Did he trust the wrong person? Did he go somewhere he should not have? Did someone close to him know more than they were saying? The not knowing was worse than any truth could have been. And somewhere out there, the person responsible was living freely, going to work, making friends, building a life, while an entire family remained trapped in the moment everything ended. Then, long after many had assumed the case would never be solved, something unexpected happened. A new detective reviewed the file, not because there was new evidence, but because sometimes fresh eyes see what others overlook. Buried deep inside the paperwork was a detail that had once seemed insignificant. A small inconsistency in a statement, a timeline that did not quite fit. It was the kind of thing that only matters when everything else has failed. The detective began quietly re-interviewing people, not accusing, just listening. And slowly a pattern began to form. A person who had always been considered a minor witness suddenly appeared in multiple parts of the story. Their version of events shifted slightly each time. Their alibi depended on someone who could no longer confirm it. And when modern forensic testing was applied to evidence that had been sitting in storage for years, the results changed everything. The DNA that once matched no one now found a connection through a distant relative in a genealogy database. It was not a name, not yet, but it was a direction. Investigators followed that trail carefully, building a family tree backward through time, eliminating possibilities one by one until only a single branch remained. And at the end of that branch was a name that had been in the case file from the very beginning, a name that no one had ever seriously suspected, a person who had attended the funeral, a person who had comforted the family, a person who had helped search for answers while hiding the truth. When police finally made the arrest, it did not happen with flashing lights and television cameras. It happened quietly, almost gently, as if the world itself was unsure how to react after so many years. The suspect did not resist. They did not deny it at first. And when the full story came out in court, it shocked everyone. The motive was small, almost meaningless compared to the damage it caused. An argument, a moment of anger. A decision made in seconds that destroyed multiple lives forever. For the family, justice brought relief, but it did not bring peace. Nothing could return what was taken, but at least now the silence was over. At least now, Kirk's name was no longer just an unsolved mystery. And yet, while one family finally received answers, another was still waiting. Because in a different place, years earlier, another young life had vanished without explanation. Her name was Ree Rasmussen, and her disappearance would become one of the most haunting mysteries the community had ever known. Ree was known as kind, independent, full of plans for the future. On the day she disappeared, she told people where she was going, when she would be back. She never returned. At first, everyone assumed it was a misunderstanding, that she had decided to stay with a friend, that she had missed a call. But when hours turned into days and no one heard from her, fear took hold. Search parties combed through fields, forests, and empty roads. Her car was found abandoned, but there were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no clear direction to follow. Police questioned friends, co-workers, anyone who had spoken to her recently. Some stories conflicted. Some details did not make sense. Rumors spread quickly, and with no facts to stop them, they grew darker with each passing day. Some believed she had run away. Others whispered about foul play. But without a body, without evidence, the case drifted into uncertainty. For years, Ria's family lived in a painful limbo, unsure whether to mourn or to hope. Every unidentified body reported in the news brought dread. Every ringing phone raised their hearts and crushed them again. Investigators never officially closed the case, but leads dried up, witnesses moved away, memories faded. And once again, silence settled in, heavy and cruel. What no one knew was that the person responsible had never left town. They had attended community events. They had smiled at neighbors. They had answered police questions calmly and convincingly. And they believed with time that they had escaped forever. But time has a way of changing people, and sometimes guilt becomes heavier than fear. Decades later, a confession emerged, not shouted, not dramatic, but whispered in a moment of weakness to someone who finally chose to speak. Police reopened the file, skeptical at first, but the details were too specific to ignore. A new search began in a place that had been overlooked before, guided by information only the killer could have known. And there, hidden beneath the earth for years, they found what everyone had feared but needed to see. Ria Rasmussen had been found. When the arrest was announced, the community stood still. The suspect was someone many people recognized, someone trusted, someone no one had imagined capable of such a crime. In court, the full story unfolded slowly, painfully. The meeting that turned dangerous. The argument that turned violent. The choice to hide the body and pretend nothing had happened. For Ria's family, the truth was devastating, but it ended the waiting. After all those years, they could finally lay her to rest, finally speak her name without wondering where she was.